Dorji, Mr. Nangai Wangchuk, Director of the Department of Disaster Management, Dr. Jenny Velasquez, Senior Regional Coordinator of the United Nations ISDR, Asia Pacific, the Chief Commissioner of Elections, the United Nations officials present here, members of Parliament, of media, distinguished officials of the Kingdom of Bhutan, all those attending this conference, this workshop, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I truly feel honored and privileged to have been invited to visit your beautiful country, the Kingdom of Bhutan, and to speak before you today in my capacity as Regional Champion for Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change Adaptation for Asia Pacific. An honorary appointment given to me by the United Nations International Strategy for Disaster Risk Reduction Secretariat for an advocacy mission on reducing disaster and climate change risks. First of all, I wish to convey my grateful appreciation to His Excellency Prime Minister Jigme Thinley for kindly receiving yesterday the mission delegation and for sharing his valuable time and wisdom and inspiring thoughts on disaster risk reduction and sustainable development efforts in Bhutan. And also to His Excellency Yonpo Ogyen Shering, Minister of Foreign Affairs, for discussing with us Bhutan's approach to international diplomacy and the possible areas of international cooperation in disaster risk reduction. Most of all, I am especially grateful to His Excellency Yonpo Minjur Dorji, Minister of Home and Cultural Affairs, who personally invited me to come to Bhutan when we first met in Kuala Lumpur in December last year, as he mentioned, on the 3rd Asian Ministerial Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction. Through him, I am getting to know Bhutan as a people, culture, and country more deeply. Your shared wisdom on happiness, generosity, and social development, among others, I shall always remember. My visit to Bhutan is a personal longing come true. I have read and heard much about your country and your people, and have been fascinated by your rich culture and your unique development philosophy of gross national happiness. And now, I stand before the very people I admire, with a deeper purpose and meaning, as I hold my very first official advocacy mission as a regional champion in the world's youngest democracy. As I mentioned to the Prime Minister in our meeting yesterday, long before I had come to Bhutan and met the first Bhutanese in my life, I have long advocated for the 4 pillars of gross national happiness, even in my young life. For good governance as a public servant, the youngest when I was 38 years old 11 years ago. And for sustainable and equitable socio-economic development, which I have been doing even in my younger days as a journalist. The protection of the environment, which I did even as a young child. And of course, the preservation of culture, which I hold very dearly. So I told the Prime Minister, as I did the other ministers I met, perhaps long before I have come to Bhutan, I have long lived the Bhutanese way of life. I was told that I have come at a most opportune time, when recent floods, unfortunately, and landslides in the country have drawn the attention and action of the government and have tested the capabilities of the 1-year-old Department of Disaster Management, as they revealed the vulnerability of the communities. Indeed, the impact of the 3 days of unabated rains early this week is disaster risk made more manifest. It is this detrimental impact on people's lives and livelihood, on the environment, and on infrastructure that we strive to lessen, or at least to avoid in our effort to advance disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation. Climate change and disaster risks are the defining issue of our time. Their increasing trend, driven by economic growth, brings to fore a human development issue and a human security concern that calls for urgent action. It is in this context that I wish to listen to you and to know more about gross national happiness and how this development philosophy and approach could influence development policies and strategies of countries, including those in the Philippines. I therefore come to convey an important message, a message that calls for unity in action in reducing disaster risks, a message that hopes for a more secure and sustainable future, and a safer environment for all of us to live in. My first message is this: climate change and disaster risks have become one of the greatest challenges to human development the world faces today. Reducing disaster risks has become a matter of high importance to the world now, especially to developing countries where disaster risks abound, and to the poor and the marginalized who are most affected by disasters. The recent floods and the tragedy they caused to a number of families here in Bhutan highlight this message. And it is this kind of disaster risk, pervading and affecting various communities in a country every now and then, which erodes effectively the hard-earned development pains of a country and makes the goals for sustainable and equitable socio-economic development more elusive. My country, the Philippines, also suffers from the recurring impact of typhoons, which visits the archipelago's territory about 20 times each passing year. Also, its location right within the Pacific Ring of Fire, where most of the world's earthquakes and volcanic eruptions occur, constantly exposes the country to the impact of these natural hazards.